Matthew's Gospel, Introduction, a Catholic Approach to Scripture and Life. In emphasizing the importance of Scripture for Catholic identity, Benedict XVI observes that some Catholics, when facing threats through their identity, especially from the postmodern claim that truth does not exist and that power dynamics are the only explanation why one interpretation of the Bible is emphasized over another, unwittingly respond by distancing themselves from Scripture by taking refuge in Marian devotions, fueled by visions and miracles, and/or, I quote, into a narrow-minded battle for the letter of the old liturgy, so as to preserve their Catholic identity. In contrast to this sectarian approach to preserving Catholic identity, the Second Vatican Council promoted greater access to Scripture, tradition, especially from the Patristic era, and to the rich liturgical heritage of the Universal Church. With respect to Scripture and to some degree patristic commentary on Scripture, this book aims at providing greater access to the Catholic meaning of the New Testament with the hope that one of the goals of the Second Vatican Council and Catholic interpretation of Scripture will be more realized. The word Catholic is based on two Greek words, which together means pertaining to the whole. For a scriptural interpretation to be Catholic, it must in some way consider how the word, verse, or passage is related to the whole of Scripture. Benedict XVI calls this manner of interpretation canonical exegesis, I quote, reading the individual texts of the Bible in context of the whole. The interpretive context of a Scripture passage is Scripture as a whole, but is not limited to Scripture. Other interpretive contexts include historical context, liturgical context, and, especially, the sacramental context. As applied to the New Testament, Scott Hahn comments that the term New Testament was not used in reference to sacred text, but rather to a sacrament, for the, I quote, only time Jesus ever uses the phrase the New Testament or the New Covenant is in Luke. This cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. Luke 22:20. Hahn continues, the New Testament was a sacrament long before it started to become a document. Jesus never said, write this. He did not write anything. Most of the 12 never ended up contributing a single book to what we call the New Testament. Hahn continues, not because they were unfaithful or disobedient, but because he said, do this, and they did that. They proclaimed the gospel, and they celebrated the Eucharist, and they obeyed what he was doing. Along with Hahn and other Scripture scholars, John Bergsma maintains that the essential meaning of a covenant, and hence the New Testament as a covenant, is that a covenant extends family relationships to other people by means of an oath. The New Testament, therefore, is new since there is a new family meal that in a sacramental manner expands the family of Jesus to those receiving the Eucharist. In receiving the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus sacramentally present in the Eucharist, this recipient becomes, in a certain sense, Jesus' I quote, blood relatives, comments Bergsma. Interpreting either the New Testament as a whole and passages of the New Testament apart from a sacramental context and other contexts bears the inherent risk of misinterpreting the passage since it has been taken out of its interpretive context. Hahn compares a non-contextual interpretive approach to that of a botanist who rips a plant out by the roots and bringing it to the lab and wonders why the bright hot lights are causing it to wilt. In this book, I have adopted this contextual interpretive approach to Scripture, which interprets a part of Scripture in relationship to the whole of Scripture, in relationship to history, to liturgy, and to the sacraments. Particular emphasis is on the scriptural canonical context. Canonical exegesis was affirmed by the Second Vatican Council in De Verbum, I quote. But, since Holy Scripture must be read and interpreted in the sacred spirit in which it was written, no less serious attention must be given to the context and unity of the whole of Scripture if the meaning of the sacred text is to be correctly worked out. The living tradition of the whole Church must be taken into account along with the harmony which exists between elements of the faith. I also intend this brief commentary on Scripture to help lead people out of a lack of hope and faith that can quickly turn to despair as life appears meaningless. In urging us to live a life imbued with faith, hope, and love, Scott Hahn stated, I quote, "Some people are given to pessimism, bad attitude, and despair. They might take a hard look at how well they live the virtue of hope. When they voice their opinions on world events or everyday business matters or the economy, do they sound like dark disciples of gloom and doom, or like children of God who know that the world is in their good Father's hands?"